Hello, and welcome to today's Climate Month webinar, Viewing Resilience Planning Through an Equity Lens, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning in partnership with the Smart Growth Network. My name is Jill Lemke. I serve as the Manager of Planning Engagement at the Maryland Department of Planning. I also serve as a member of the Smart Growth Network Steering Committee. The Smart Growth Network is a national alliance of advocates, practitioners, policymakers, and local leaders working towards a shared vision for land use and infrastructure policies and actions that result in healthy, equitable, sustainable, and prosperous communities for all. In addition to hosting webinars, we provide information on effective planning, development, and preservation practices. The Smart Growth Network website is undergoing a transition. Please stay tuned for updates. Today's webinar is one in a series of webinars hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning on sustainable growth and planning related topics. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted along with past webinars for viewing via the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov or by visiting our YouTube channel. Our website also provides valuable information on statewide planning initiatives, tools, and educational opportunities, including information on future webinars. While you are there, please subscribe to our newsletter to learn more about our upcoming programs. It is important to note that the views expressed by the speakers are those of the speaker and not necessarily those of the Maryland Department of Planning, the state of Maryland, or the Smart Growth Network. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1.5 CM credits or 1 Sustainability and Resilience Specialty credit from the American Planning Association. To receive your credits, please visit the APA's website, planning.org, to log into your account and search for the name of today's event. You can also search for event number 929-5004. Following the presentation, we will address as many questions as time permits. You can submit a question at any time by opening the Q&A tool in the Zoom control panel. Now, I am pleased to introduce our speakers for today. Raven Nee is an ORISE Community Resilience and Equity Social Science Fellow in the U.S. EPA's Office of Research and Development's Center for Public Health and Environmental Assessment. Her background is in environmental studies and sustainable urban planning, and she is especially interested in intersectional equity and climate resilience. Marissa Matzler is a social scientist in the U.S. EPA's Office of Research and Development's Center for Public Health and Environmental Assessment, where she conducts interdisciplinary mixed method research on community resilience, infrastructure planning, and the social dynamics of disaster waste management. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Marissa, who will kick off the presentations. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jill. We're very excited to be here and talking with the Smart Growth Network today. Really looking forward to discussion after our presentation. We're really hoping to get some feedback from you all on this new tool that we released at the end of last year, the Equitable Resilience Builder tool. So really looking forward to conversation. For a bit more background, climate resilience planning is a big part of the social science that Raven and I do at Office of Research and Development. And so this tool is really based in the scientific literature and is going to offer a variety of different science-based activities for planners to use. So you'll notice, though, as we go along, that we're really building on a lot of general planning best practices. So we hope that a lot of this looks familiar to you, and that you can make some of the adjustments that our tool is suggesting to focus some of these more general planning tools and best practices towards equity. And we really think that this work dovetails nicely with the principles of smart growth. So in preparation for this presentation, we were looking more into the principles of smart growth and are excited for this opportunity to exchange ideas with you all. Okay, so quick agenda. We are going to give a brief introduction to the Equitable Resilience Builder tool. Again, we'd love your feedback on this tool. This will include a live demo of the tool itself. We'll also give an overview of a case study of some tool activities that was conducted on the ground in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and then finish with some current opportunities that we're offering to you to learn more about the tool. We also have some opportunities for you to interact directly with our team. So do stay tuned for that. And also we hope that you can start using this tool in your own development and planning work. Okay, so let's get into the presentation here. There we are. So the ERB, this stands for Equitable Resilience Builder, and that's how we'll be referring to the tool throughout the presentation. As you know, there's many acronyms in government. So the ERB is a downloadable tool that helps communities carry out inclusive resilience planning. That's the big word here, inclusive. So this tool really grew out of our social science team hearing from land use planners, from community development professionals, and other planners that they're wanting to incorporate equity in their work, but they're not always sure exactly how to do that. And so the ERB was created to provide that how-to. So it's intended to be used by a core team. Mostly we've worked with state and local agencies, community organizations to use this tool. And the core team uses the ERB to carry out engagement activities, also to assess hazards, equity, and resilience. They can assess it on their project site or at a neighborhood scale. And finally, to identify and evaluate actions to strengthen resilience, again, in an equitable way. So ERB is doing this by providing guidance for carrying out a number of different collaborative activities. The tool also provides a space to save and store materials. So I know for myself, things can really get lost on my computer. And so the ERB tool provides one place to store all these different materials. And you'll see that a bit more in the demo. You can also have multiple projects going at the same time. Finally, visualizations of results that you can share with the broader community are also provided by the tool. So again, ERB is really a general planning tool, you'll see, but it's built to be customizable to your setting and your needs. So it can assist with multiple different types of planning and community engagement. And again, thinking about smart growth, for example, we're really seeing that inclusion and equity are really critical to achieving many of the principles of smart growth. But in particular, the last one that's focusing on encouraging community and stakeholder collaboration in development decisions. And so you'll see as we move through our presentation that ERB is providing many different options for stakeholder collaboration in decisions. So again, just one more example of this dovetailing of ERB with smart growth. So as we all know, there are a lot of tools out there and a lot of resources focused on resilience and resilience assessments for planning and for development plans. And so we were really interested in making a tool that complemented what's already out there. So we're hoping that we're not duplicating resources here, but rather complementing. So one of the things that makes ERB stand out in this space is that it's, again, centering equity in both the content of the tool, but also in the process of using the tool itself. So one way it's doing this is by providing really specific outreach and engagement techniques. So for example, we have a youth engagement guide. How might you bring youth onto your core team and make them some of the decision makers in this space? There are also these centering equity tips that you'll see on every page for each activity when we get into the demo. One of the primary methods that is employed by ERB to actually do this centering of equity is storytelling. So ERB provides, for example, prompts for team meetings and community workshops. And importantly, what this does is it allows all of the resilience assessments that you might be doing to really begin with local knowledge, local expectations, local perspectives. And so then you're going to layer on additional sources, data sources on top of that. And that is really a key to the ERB process. Another example is the use of indicator development through participatory methods in the tool. And this is a bit different from some of the, the expert-based versions of these methods that you might be familiar with. So for example, in our indicator card sorting activity, residents and community groups can evaluate resilience really using indicators that matter most to them. So they are choosing and sorting through indicators. And then through a ranking activity, they can actually find how some of these traditional indicators of sustainability might actually be leading to equity blind spots. And how might they be able to address those equity blind spots? We think this really helps outline development trade-offs so that you can prioritize actions, again, that are really based on local needs and local expectations. And so that starts to get at the so what of ERB. And so, why are we focusing so strongly on equity in resilience planning? And there's a large body of scientific evidence, again, that's showing us that social and economic processes that create vulnerability, particularly to different climate disasters, impact some more than others in these multiple overlapping ways. So if you want a resilient community, if you want sustainable smart growth, you need to pay attention to all the various groups that are impacted by development decisions. And so that's what we're trying to do with this tool. And also not just looking at the needs and challenges of specific communities, but also remembering all of the assets that each group brings to the table. So again, a lot of our research has shown that, resilience projects can unintentionally make some inequities worse. Again, it's well-intentioned work, but it ends up reproducing these harms. And so how can we move past this? And so we think about whose needs are prioritized, whose voices are heard, and how can we make that more inclusive? And we think, coming back to those smart growth principles, if you're looking to foster distinctive, attractive communities, this strong sense of place, this is great language that we were hearing from the smart growth principles. You need to be doing these assessments, we think, of different community challenges and assets. And again, pay particular attention to the groups that are usually left out of the conversation. So this is going to allow you to strengthen that development towards existing communities. All communities look a little different, and some of them are harder to see, quote unquote, because they're not recognized by current assessment methods. So in this way, we really see that inclusion and equity are critical to achieving these resilience goals. In designing this tool, just a quick note to say that we worked hard to walk the talk in designing this tool. So we used a human-centered design in which we carried out a discovery research phase to better understand the needs of local resilience planners. We refined the problem that we were trying to solve with these user personas and with folks on the ground. And then we held an ideation workshop, you can see, with a variety of participants. They helped us brainstorm different solutions. And this really led to the design principles that we based the tool development on. And this resulted in this creation of 5 distinct tool sections. So we have the plan, engage, assess, strategize, and move forward sections. And each of these sections contains a series of activities, and the core team can select from them. So in just a minute, we're going to open up the tool and you're going to see that there's a lot in there, but just a reminder that, again, this tool is really designed to be adaptable and flexible. So, users don't have to do all the sections or all the activities, really depending on their goals and their time and their capacity. So just a few examples. Potentially, you are looking to find partners for your grant applications. The Engage section is going to be a great place to jump right into and find activities to create an engagement plan. We also hear about the need to make the case, often to local governments or city council, and the Assess section is a great place to jump in to demonstrate a need or a problem. You might be a group that already has a plan and that you're trying to move forward, and so you'd like to evaluate some potential actions to think about their impacts and costs. And so the strategize action section is a great place for folks like that to jump in. Finally, monitoring and documenting impact. This is a big one, often is left off many processes, but we provide some really concrete ways to move forward on monitoring and documenting your impact. And with that, we'd like to do, again, a quick demo of the tool for you all. So I'm going to hand the mic to Raven, who is going to walk us through the tool.
Hello, everyone. My name is Raven. I'm an ORISE Fellow at the Office of Research and Development, EPA. I'm so excited to give you a quick deep dive of the ERB tool. So let's dive right in. We'll start with a brief orientation to the tool pages, and then we're going to highlight some specific activities that we think are especially relevant to planners and smart growth principles. Just for your general information, you can download the zip folder from our webpage and then extract the tool to your device. For communities that might be concerned about EPA having access to their data, the tool is not connected to any EPA servers. Everything lives on your own personal device, so it's not a concern. So this is the landing page, or what you first see when you first download and open the tool on your own device. And you'll see on the left hand, there are links to learn more about the ERB process and the case studies. That the examples of ERB projects were case studies that were used both to test and develop ERB. On the right-hand side, you can find tips on how to customize the tool and navigate directly to the PDF manual, which has step-by-step instructions for how to work your way through the tool and download, install, etc. And in the center, you can create a new project, and you can also explore the tool activities without creating a project. We are jumping into a previously created project just for the sake of time. And so now we are in our own custom project. You can see the title on the top, which says Smart Growth Demo Project. And then on the left-hand side, we have the navigation menu. You can see the 5 sections of ERB, and each section is a toggle heading. So when you click the heading, it expands that section, and you can see all of the activities associated with that chapter. The chapter page gives more information about that section, listing what activities are included, as well as what the potential outputs would be from completing them. As you click on individual activity pages, you'll see what is involved and all of the relevant materials. Each of these activity pages is laid out in the same format, as you can see when we click between activities. So each activity page includes the activity's title, why and how to complete it, as well as the associated outputs. On the top right-hand side, you will see a list of what you will need, including who should be involved. This might include just the core team or community outreach, depending on what stage of the process you're on and which activity. You'll also see how long it might take, the supporting materials, which are all embedded as hot links that open as Word documents in a new window, so you don't lose your place in the tool. And some activities also have completed examples, so you can reference and see what it looks like. All of this is a lot of information, but you get to pick and choose what you want to use in the tool, and you by no means have to do every activity. As Marissa mentioned earlier, ERB is meant to be used by a core team, ideally made up of participants from government agencies, organizations, and residents, and the tool provides guidance to ensure inclusive representation for this core group. For example, the recruitment guide, which is under what you will need, equips resilience planners and other practitioners with the concepts, knowledge, and best practices necessary to recruit an inclusive core team. You will see our materials are laid out similarly to the tool pages, so this format becomes familiar very quickly. each worksheet follows the same structure to detail exactly the purpose of the activity, who should be involved, and what you will need, followed by detailed step-by-step instructions. These worksheets contain guidance to help support engagement activities, and some are built in with templates that you can fill in the blanks or customize as needed. Because these are all Word documents, it's very easy to edit them to your needs. For example, this recruitment guide has a place to organize potential members' contact information and affiliations, and we even include a sample invitation letter that you can easily edit and email and forward to prospective team members. These worksheets are supposed to support capacity around project management and help you along the way. BRB also has tips for centering equity located on the bottom right-hand side of each activity page. And these centering equity tips are designed to help the users carry out each activity in a way that emphasizes the importance of equitable, inclusive, and just engagement. For example, when recruiting your core team, you want to make sure that the team is inclusive of diverse constituencies and representative of community identities and perspectives. And you want to make sure that when you can, you are fairly compensating members for their time. So as we have a lot of planners in our virtual room today, you may notice that many of these activities and these equity tips are going to sound familiar as planning best practices. So what is unique about ERB is the collection of all of these best practices into one tool and the focus of every single element on inclusiveness and equity. We have it baked in on every page. Moving to the Engage section, the tool provides activities that the core team can use to deepen engagement with community members through the resilience planning process, such as empathizing and reducing barriers to participation, identifying and diagramming community connections, and creating a community engagement plan. The community connections activities combines stakeholder analysis and network mapping to help identify where information and resources are flowing among organizations in the community. The red arrows illustrate flows of information, and the black arrows demonstrate flows of resources, which can include but is not limited to financial resources. The different sectors and groups are highlighted in different colors. So going through this exercise can help identify new opportunities for collaboration and coordination, or point out organizations that might be missing from the table. And it also is highlighting existing partnerships that you can make sure you lean on throughout your project. Moving on to the Assess section, users can choose from a series of collaborative activities and find support for planning workshops with community participants. ERB is structured around 3 main workshops and begins the process of assessing hazards and resilience with the local knowledge and data, and then building upon this by integrating data from other sources. To ground planning in local knowledge, ERB uses storytelling as a primary data collection technique. The tool prompts can be used throughout the process by the core team in community workshops or other gatherings. And storytelling supports trust and relationship building, which is key to building a strong and reciprocal relationship with the community. We recognize as planners that public meetings can sometimes become unproductive as people compete to have their perspectives heard, and ERB provides a framework to assist with respectful sharing. For example, when assessing hazards, we recommend that the core team kick off their workshop with participants sharing stories with each other about their experiences with hazards or disasters. So this activity organizes workshop participants into groups of 3 and assigns roles. Each person takes turns being the storyteller, the listener, and the note taker. And we provide 2 prompts and a space for the note taker to jot down their notes so that they can ask appropriate follow-up questions. And you can see the first prompt asks the storyteller to share a 5-minute story about a time they experienced a hazard or disaster. And these prompts can easily be tailored to suit your project. In the climate change space, we've received a lot of feedback, and I'm sure everyone can relate that there's a huge focus on doom and gloom. This narrow focus causes both planners and communities to overlook all of the capacity communities already have to address these challenges. So you can see with the second storytelling prompt, we encourage community members to explore how they've overcome challenges in the past, which leads to how they can apply that to present situations. So just a reminder to always include a discussion of assets when you're discussing hazards. And you can customize these prompts to suit your project topics very easily. We also provide a facilitator's guide, which we found to be a critical component when we tested ERB with communities. It includes suggestions for planning the workshops, centering equity and facilitation, reducing barriers to participation, creating opportunities for participants to connect, as well as sample agendas. You can see we have workshop 1, workshop 2, workshop 3, and here you can make a detailed itinerary for what you will need and what the objectives will be for each particular activity. So we also provide additional resources, which can be found in a link when we navigate back to the tool on the upper right-hand part of the page. These resources can be standalone documents that can be applied to all of your engagement or especially useful for specific workshops. For example, we have a resource on trauma-informed approaches to engagement, which could be especially helpful and useful when sharing stories about potentially emotionally charged topics. People who have survived a disaster will have a strong emotional response as they've felt vulnerable or had something horrible happen to them or lost something. So this helps define what trauma is, what goes into a trauma-informed approach, how it affects people, and how you can respond and engage with communities that have experienced trauma in a respectful way that doesn't re-traumatize them. We also have a data ethics resource. And this is really critical because it helps the team incorporate local knowledge that's gathered through the storytelling in a way that is respectful, prevents further harm to communities, and is sensitive to key issues such as data sovereignty. So you want to make sure when you're using data that the community is given, you're giving them credit and you're not using it in a way that's in any way exploitative of them. All of these guides include references for you to dive deeper into the material to learn more about those topics. In planning departments, we create a lot of data and maps, and sometimes there aren't clear next steps as far as what to do with that data, or it might not allow constituents to interact with the data or provide feedback in a way that's accessible. Under Assess Resilience, we provide a participatory mapping activity. So everyone into maps, get excited. This activity asks the community to label and notate where they experience hazards and also identify where their assets are. Again, we want to highlight those strengths. This allows the information and priority areas to be directed by the community, allowing them to see where their vulnerable areas are and where they can capitalize on existing strengths, or they should maybe prioritize preservation of key assets. You can see on this map, there's dots and yellow and orange stickies. So the different colors represent strengths versus vulnerabilities. And they all have notes adding communities specific feedback and information about those particular locations. So the core team can use participatory mapping as a starting point for further data collection or analyses. And this activity is interactive and hands-on, making it an accessible way to garner community input that can be fun. And the in-person nature of this exercise also lends itself to engagement with rural communities where residents might not have broadband or access to online ways to give feedback. So this process helps keep mapping analyses grounded in community perspectives of hazards and assets. Following the assess section, we continue to employ planning best practices, and we have a section on strategizing actions, including an activity that evaluates proposed actions identified by the community and evaluates them for their potential benefits and costs. ERB is unique among resilience assessments in that it not only leads to action and critically evaluates these actions based on equity considerations, but it enables the community to make informed choices about trade-offs. So in this table, you can see that it examines benefits as well as additional synergies or potential unintended consequences which might arise from pursuing specific actions. You get to see who are the people that benefit and what existing resources can be leveraged. And we have a sample filled out, but we have a blank one that you can fill in for yourself in your project. And finally, moving on to the move forward section. The tool provides concrete next steps for users to take to implement their actions that they outlined in their collaborative process with ERB. And then they can take the tool's outputs and incorporate them into a sustainability plan, a comprehensive plan. They can use the information to apply for grants or apply it to what other needs they might have. So there is a reflection diary that the tool prompts you to fill out as you move your way through the different chapters. And this leads to you compiling a wealth of information that you've gathered throughout the whole process. And in this last chapter, when you revisit how the process went and highlight any lessons learned, you can reflect on both the successes and the challenges. And this can help with planning in the future. And we think it's also important to celebrate your hard work. We've done a lot of research and engagement, and the community's put a lot into this. And one way to maintain engagement is to celebrate and recognize community members for their work, which can help sustain commitment to the project. Make sure that you honor and take time to recognize people's contributions to the process and give credit to the participants. Without them, you would have not been able to complete this important resilience work. You can see there's places to brainstorm with the community on moving forward and what next steps you want to take for implementation based on the actions identified through the ERB process. So that was a lot of information, a very, very speedy introduction to the ERB tool, but we hope this demo gave you a good sense of how ERB helps build equitable resilience while centering equity, and how robust the tool materials are to support capacity around engagement to achieve smart growth principles. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out the ERB webpage at epa.gov/emergency response research/equitable resilience builder. And that's where you can download the tool, learn about how the tool was developed, and sign up for our mailing list to receive ERB related updates and news. We're very excited to announce that as of last week, we've just released the Mac version of the tool. So now you can use this tool both on PC and Mac and Windows operating systems. We know as a group of planners, we all love a good story map. So I'm going to hand it back to Marissa to share a case study, but there's a lot of rich information on the website that you should definitely check out when you get a chance.
Thank you so much, Raven. Yes, there's a lot to be seen in the tool. I hope that you all download and explore it further. We wanted to share quickly. Let's see if I can get back to the beginning here. We wanted to share quickly an application of some of the ERB activities that was, again, conducted while the tool was still in development, as Raven mentioned. So this process here really helped inform the current version of the activities. So the tool is as we were saying, quite new. And so we don't have case studies of folks who have used all the sections yet, but we're working to develop these over the next year. So also reach out if you're interested in being a part of that process. So this is a story map that was created by the Urban Waters Program in one of their ambassador locations, the Lower Grand River Organization of Watersheds in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And let's see. I'm hoping I can start us off here. So workshops were held with this organization in 2022 to get input from community residents to inform a watershed resilience plan. So I just wanted to scroll through this so folks kind of get a feeling for the physicality of some of these activities that are in the ERB. And we're also going to look at some of the outcomes that this group took away from the process. So this is available online for you all to look at some of the details, and we'll put that in the chat so folks can see that if it's of more interest to you. But just the brief overview here is that they were looking to put again, put their technical assistance to work in looking at a watershed resilience planning activity. And they wanted to provide information on how climate change was going to impact the watershed and some recommendations for working through this. And so they wanted to speak with local residents about how they viewed their watershed and really, again, start with those local perspectives and that local knowledge. So we held 3 workshops in different subwatersheds in this area, using ERB materials for storytelling, also participatory mapping, and that actions brainstorming work. And so the workshops were great in that they provided, again, information on how different population groups were affected by climate issues, and also their concerns around equity and the distribution of resources to deal with these impacts. So this organization was able to use community input in their watershed resilience plan and gained more experience with community engagement using these using the Equitable Resilience Builder. So just to scroll through some of these pictures here, we can kind of see the physicality again of the space. There are multiple different spaces, and highlighting some of those, they initially highlight these principles of ERB that we described, that we collectively developed. So again, we're really focused on building relationships and trust, using that local data and knowledge, recognizing trauma and facilitating action, and really providing accessibility for under-resourced communities. And adaptability is a big part of the ERB process. So again, scrolling through to see some of these spaces where people were working, you can see that they are working to, this is one of the initial versions of looking at how different groups, how different problems are cascading and hazards are cascading into one another. How are they related? Can we think about, if we change one of them, how it will affect other problems in the area? And so it's important to look to see what some of these outcomes might be from the process. And so there are a variety of priority actions and tactics that the group came to. Some of them are rather general and others are more specific. So you can kind of see some examples here. So thinking about improving that physical accessibility to watershed benefits from its natural areas. This stood out as one of the barriers that they found. Involving youth in active ways. So this was really where our youth engagement guide grew out of. We understood that this was a group that is not usually included in planning activities to this level and wanted to include them more. Decreasing extreme heat. It emerged as a very important specific problem for this area. And so they wanted to look directly at how to decrease extreme heat impacts on folks in the area. So as you can see, there are some more general and some more specific issues that arrived, and sort of, again, the physicality of these spaces. And of course, the maps that we all love here. And finally, wanting to talk a bit about some of the lessons learned. Again, this is another one of these, one of the main outcomes of this group. And so again, I think the lessons learned really speak to number 2 here in particular, the variety of different issues that folks are addressing in resilience planning activities that, again, I think dovetail really nicely into a lot of the smart growth and development spaces. So again, communities brought up a number of different overlapping needs. So thinking about safe and affordable housing, living wage jobs, opportunities for youth, connection to basic resources, drinking water, a number of different things are overlapping in these spaces. And so it's really a rich discussion that can bring up a lot of different issues that are all connected. I also wanted to bring up here, they talked about offering incentives to folks to be a part of this work. And we have really, as Raven mentioned, thought more about this as compensation for folks' time. So initially thinking about incentives for folks to join, but also this idea that people are doing real work in these spaces to plan their communities and to think through these issues, and thinking about fair compensation for everyone. We've kind of changed the way we're thinking about that. So this is just a resource for you all to look more closely at one example of ERB work on the ground. And now I'm going to take us back to our PowerPoint presentation, if I can find it on my screen. Whoops. Apologies. And I'm going to hand the mic back to Raven to give us some closing thoughts and also some opportunities that are coming up for you to interact with our team.
Yes, so we hope that ERB, communities can get out of using it, include building stronger connections for the community around both resilience and equity, and a stronger sense of community network around those particular issues, learn about what the hazards they are facing are and how they can build equity into their resilience planning, identify actions and commitments and make strong commitments to implementing those actions, develop visualizations, and also document the entire assessment with the tool within the tool itself to help make the case for getting funding and truly implementing those actions that were identified. And so we're excited to say we have a few different opportunities. We know that tools come with a lot of learning curve sometimes. And so in our effort to flatten that curve, we are offering one-on-one coaching. Myself and my mentor, Emily Eisenhower, are running this totally free coaching program. And so we really want to support ERB tool users so that they are not overwhelmed by the activities and can use it to the best way possible to support their projects, and also allow us to continue to evaluate and improve the tool as we go along. So the way this coaching program works is that coaches are EPA staff with community engagement experience, and they'll get paired with your community project and meet with your core team for up to 2 hours per month, one-on-one. And this kind of advice and tailoring, maybe we've shown you the case study of the Algrow and the watersheds, or one of the activities made you think of a specific project you're working on right now. So if you were wondering how you could best start using ERB wherever you're at in your project, you can bring your plan to us and we can help you tailor it to your goals and help you adapt and choose activities that best will support you and take you to the next level. And we'd like to learn from you and support you in your engagement processes. Even though we've talked a lot about best practices, there's always more that can be added. And if you've looked at the tool and you have your project and you're still not sure where to start, even after this demo, we are now offering also free open office hours. And we actually have 2 opportunities this week. They are normally the second Wednesday and the third Friday of every month. August is a funky month, so those are landing in the same week this week. But Wednesday is from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time, and on Friday it's from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. You can hop on and off as you please. You do not need to stay on the whole time. And you can ask any question you might have. Maybe you're not sure about the coaching program, but you can hop on and ask us more about it. Or if you're having any issues figuring out, if you have any glitches or anything, we're happy to problem solve that. Or if you're already further along in your engagement process and you want to see where you should look to in the tool, we're happy to provide you with suggestions or also provide additional tips on facilitation or suggestions on how to best engage with certain communities or problem solve how to remove barriers for communities that are harder to access or harder to get involved. So we're so excited to have shared all this with you. Next slide, please. We will share all the PowerPoint slides after. This is our links where you can find the tool and user guide, our very large team of ERB contributors, people that made it possible, and additional reading to learn more about equitable resilience and this type of work. With that, we're going to turn to the question and answer portion of the webinar. And we thank you for your attention and time, and we're excited to share this tool with you.
Thank you both. This is really an interesting tool and a very important topic of planning and community engagement, and equity is definitely something we all need to be a little bit more cognizant of. So in terms of the questions, I'm going to start with a few that are very specific to the tool and some of the things you mentioned. Can you offer some examples of what you mean by fair compensation for participants?
Oh, great question. Yes, you know, I think sort of the bare minimum that we suggest is providing folks with, you know, again, planning best practices, thinking about providing people with food and access to daycare facilities and childcare and these kinds of things. But we also have worked on paying folks honorariums for their time in the process. So it is usually not at a usual hourly rate, but some kind of honorarium money for their time. I don't know, Raven, if you have additional ideas there.
I don't. I know it's quite possible some organizations don't have the budget to do that, but we do think if you can fiscally compensate people with their time and provide those supportive services, and just also be cognizant of when you're scheduling these meetings for. If you're doing it during the workday, then you're going to get a very, very narrow set of folks showing up. So I think it kind of depends on the context of also how much time you're asking from participants, or if there's some other way to give them credit for their work, whether it's volunteer, community hours, or something in that kind of realm.
On a related
thank you for the question.
Sure. On a related question, someone is asking whether or not there are EPA grants that help fund these processes, and whether or not compensation would be included as a allowable expense.
This is a great question as well. Yes, we definitely often struggle as government agencies in different ways to be able to compensate people for their time. At the moment, there are we are not aware of any grants that are available at the moment to use ERB specifically, but the community change granting process that is moving forward right now lines up really well. EPA, I'll put the link in the chat. I'll look for that. But the community change grants really line up nicely with equity principles and are very focused on that. And I would point you towards those opportunities. EPA also offers technical assistance with that grant writing process.
Thank you. Some folks have been asking, because EPA is a federal agency, other folks may have tried to use the Census Bureau's Community Explorer, CDC's Social Vulnerability Tool, and someone also asked whether or not FEMA is or was involved in the process of creating this tool.
Yes, that's a great question. As we mentioned, there are so many great tools that are out there. And that is, yes, exactly. We are working towards making these complementary tools. So one of the things that the ERB tool does is it points to these other tools to find. So for example, we're not a mapping, ERB is not a mapping platform in and of itself. We are more focused on what might you do with that mapping information that you might collect from communities. How can you do mapping in a participatory way? And so what we recommend is that folks go to these other tools and collect that information and bring it back into the ERB. So we are very cognizant of this wealth of other tools that are out there, and we very much recommend that folks look to all of these other tools. And yes, we have been in discussions with FEMA and their resilience work, especially because our group is, you'll notice from the presentation and some of the things that we were saying, we're very focused in the disaster space. And so many of the applications of ERB that we've been working with has been in hazard mitigation, planning, and thinking about climate disaster planning. So yeah, FEMA is definitely a great resource for us and a group that we've been working across the federal family.
Great, thank you. Can you give an estimate on the time it would take, especially given the case study? How long does the process take to work through in a typical example, or in just the case of the case study you presented?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is this is where we're really we're exploring this with different groups. So because of the customizability of the tool and folks jumping in different spots, you can really expand it or contract it to just doing like one activity as Raven showed in the demo. There are some of these activities that are a couple of hours, so it would take some time to prep and just do the activity and move forward if it's just part of the process that you're already doing. We do recommend that if you're starting from square one and trying to go through the whole process, we're looking more at a months to year long kind of event. I don't know, Raven, if you'd like to jump in on that question as well.
We haven't seen a community do every single activity start to finish, so that's part of why we don't have a very specific answer to that question. But I'd want to say like 4 to 6 months at a minimum if you're doing a majority of activities. And we are really interested in learning more about how this kind of plays out over different time scales. So that's part of why we're running the coaching pilot, so we can have a better understanding of how much time do people need for these different activities, and if they wanted to pick and choose workshops, like what is the ideal amount of time. But that's one of those things that's flexible and not defined in the tool, because it definitely will be defined by the project context and your community engagement. I did see one question about what is the cost of the tool, and I just want to say that it is free 100%. There is no cost, and so that's one thing that I think is great about it, and really showing how EPA is helping communities better start to engage with this material and apply it in the work.
Great. We've had 2 questions about how the tool could be used in an educational setting, so I'll read those. One was pre-submitted. So what are some examples of how this can be used in Maryland, and how can K through 12 schools use this tool? And then there was a question about using it in a college environment. And let's see. In addition to my role as an advocacy planner, I teach a senior level environmental planning course at a local college. Any tips, samples, educational modules that I can use to have my students engage with in a real world or made up scenario?
I'll take this one first. So I think for the younger age group, you can definitely look at the resources and see and even the tips on centering equity, and see what kind of content might be appropriate to facilitate a discussion. And you could adapt any of the activities for your classroom. Like that, I think that the participatory mapping would be really fun to do with kids. And you could totally adapt it. It doesn't always have to be about equity and resilience. You could have a bigger conversation. You could say like, where have you been, or like, where do you shop, and where do you work, and where do you live? And then you could have a conversation about how walkable kids communities are, and that type of way. I think you can use the activities and adapt them to have other conversations. And I think it's important to always discuss the equity considerations and resilience considerations, but the content can be adapted. For higher level education, I think if you have any kind of applied studio class where you're working with the client, you can definitely pick and choose through the tool and start employing those best practices, or organize a workshop. And I think a lot of the activities and resources talk about best practices, such as the youth engagement guide. We actually do have a guide on how to best engage youth that's both appropriate and meaningful. You don't want to just say, oh, we talk to young people. You want to do it in a way that's meaningfully asking them for their opinion, feedback, because they have a lot to offer, and you want to make sure you're talking to them as well. Marissa, do you have anything to add?
No, just that I love that idea of getting this into classrooms. And I think, honestly, like just letting a class loose on the tool and seeing how they work through it. I know for us, we would love to hear the feedback from your class. If you end up with that, please, if you end up trying this out, please do let us know how it goes. But I do think that the tool can walk through, especially a college level class. They can walk through the tool and follow the guidance and see and work with it pretty directly without a lot of modification or, too much that you'd have to add to it.
Great, thank you. Sort of a follow-on question, because I think as you get feedback from communities who are using the tool and maybe make changes or improvements to the tool, is there going to be a mechanism for notifying folks when there is an update available to the tool? And along those same lines, as someone who uses a Mac, there have been reports that the Mac tool is currently not working for some people. So you can send that back to your IT folks.
That is good information to have. We would really love to meet and talk about like what's going wrong with it, because we've tested it and it was working for people, but if there's a specific issue with the tool, sometimes there are work and federal firewalls too. Sometimes that blocks things.
Yes.
And just making sure that you're there's certain files in the extracted folder that you have to make sure you click on. So I believe for the Mac folder, it's just the one that says app, and you can double click that one and it should open. But please email us. We really would like to answer these questions and make sure they're not an issue. And then for updates, you can check the website periodically, but I do highly recommend signing up for our listserv. We are trying to be very intentional to not spam people, so we promise you won't get more than a handful of emails per year. We did send out a couple this past week just because we had exciting updates for the Mac deployment. We have our GitHub page available for the tool as well. So if there are any coders in the audience, we would love to have you play with the code and share what you find back with us. Anything to add, Marissa?
Nope, that's perfect.
Great. Another suggestion that we've gotten, or idea, and perhaps you've thought about this already, is there a way to adapt the tool to being useful for online engagements and hybrid meetings using online hosted tools?
Yes, yes, there is a lot of interest in that online space. So we do hear you, and that we are working on different ideas on how we might be able to put the tool online. But one of the big benefits of having the downloadable tool is that data sovereignty and that disconnection, so that you can store it, all of the information that you're gathering safely where on your own machine and in whichever way you prefer to do. We do have one of our activities is something that can be shared in like a Zoom space or in another virtual call. We have some guidance on how to do some of these activities virtually through again a Zoom or a different kind of virtual call space. In particular, the indicators activity has some good virtual support there. But yes, we are thinking about it.
Great.
And so we'd also like your guidance on what would be most useful in that online space as well. So if the person that asked the question wants to add a couple more comments on that, that'd be great. Kind of what are you looking for the online space? Why would that be, what would be most helpful?
Thank you. There is also a question. There was a pre-submitted question that asked which global organizations or entities might have collaborated on the tool, which as an EPA, I don't know if you have done any international work, but we also have a question that we do have some international viewers. Someone from Canada is asking whether or not they should be aware of any specific US legislative policy built into the tool, or is it fairly universal for adaptation by others?
I will take this one. So although we didn't work with international partners, and a lot of the resources we suggest for getting more census type data is US centric, I think it can completely be adapted to different contexts, international contexts. And I actually did meet with someone who was also a fellow through EPA, but was working in the Balkans region. And so I met with her and another colleague of mine, and we discussed and shared different information and resources where we talked through how they could adapt it to that context and what were her research questions and what she was trying to engage the communities on. It was a lot of resilience and flooding resilience in that way. And we gave suggestions on which activities to turn to, and also gave suggestions on resources that we know of outside of EPA that have more international or global data available that could replace the different US centric resources we provide. So that's something you could take up with the coaching. We'd be happy to talk through and try to share out what kinds of equivalents of that different international data and where to get that to support your project, or just highlight which particular activities would be most useful. That being said, you're going to have to, even though this can be used internationally, you're going to want to use your cultural competency skills and really talk about what is going to be the best way to engage, and making sure that you're kind of trying to bend to what the cultural norms are around gathering and engaging around those types of questions, and making sure that you're being really respectful in how you're adapting that.
Great. Someone has asked how, within the tool, given our often contentious public interactions with communities and between communities, how does the tool make recommendations, or how does it deal with conflicts between participants over assessments, competing strategies, responsibilities, funding, etc.? And are there suggestions for conflict resolution and collaboration?
Yes, this is such a good comment. Indeed, these spaces are very contentious. And so I think that's really where our facilitation guide shines. There is just so much that goes into putting together these meeting spaces to be respectful and also working with conflicts and conflict resolution within the event itself. And so I think both our trauma-informed approach guidance, as well as the facilitation guidance, is really going to lead folks along those lines. And so, yes, that's a big part of building trust with communities, is being able to work through these conflicts, and that there are differences. And I think that's a big part of this. And so many of our activities, what really one of the benefits is that the activities allow you to gather all of these different ideas and perspectives, and they're kind of on a similar playing field to work through them. This is not to say that conflict will not happen in these spaces. So, but that we can provide guidance to work through them. I don't know, Raven, if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I would say there's not any kind of strict guidance of like, oh, if you have a majority vote of this many people, then you go with option A versus B.
Yeah.
But I think the logic model of thinking through these pros and cons and who benefits and who will be harmed, that's built into the tool. And so thinking through that, like, it's not a cut and dry answer of yes or no, or what is the right choice. But I think doing it in this collaborative way, and kind of starting from the place of listening and starting from the place of sharing, making sure everyone is able to provide their feedback, I think that already starts off more of a conversation instead of an argument. And I think that is really baked into the tool and the activities, and comes with is also part of the facilitation guide. And I think one other thing is maybe you really want to talk about flooding and climate change in your community, and someone is, or if maybe you're working with a community that doesn't resonate with the words climate change, and even though they're concerned about wildfires or flooding, they're going to be turned off by hearing the words climate change, creating a lexicon, and just don't use those words. Figure out what ways you need to get around that so you can still engage and get their feedback, because it's still important. They're still being impacted. And also being open to, if you were going to talk about one thing, if someone starts bringing up something like, we've noticed, I wasn't part of it, but I heard from one of the case studies that there isn't this clear distinction for participants between different environmental hazards, like they're all hazards, so they all need to be addressed. So there was one case study where they were talking about brownfields and Superfund sites, but someone brought up gun violence, and there was so basically the facilitators had to pivot to also incorporate that and include that. And we know these things are compounding factors. So maybe you start with a very specific set of goals or questions. You just have to be flexible to talk about the other concerns the community is bringing up.
And that is perfect, Raven. I thank you for that. And it also reminded me that another important part of this is yes, listening, but then and then following up. So that's the other thing that is going to be provided in this tool, is that there's actually a place to, so oftentimes I think we hear these stories and then, okay, there they are. And then you kind of just move forward with your plan as you were going to do, like, okay, we listened, but that was nice. It doesn't relate. We need to move on. And so we provide this way of being able to take these key takeaways and bring them into the next step of the tool and the next step of the tool, so that you are actually following up on this information. And also being, working through expectations management and this idea of listening to different concerns and writing them down and having them be out there, but also being clear with your participants about what you can address through the process that you are currently engaged in, whatever planning process that is, and what you cannot. And so, just to say that follow-up is super important, and that's another key thing with this tool, is that you're able to bring that information forward and actually use it, if that makes sense, rather than just the listening. So, yeah, thank you. These are good questions. Thank you, guys.
Another question is, does the tool include evaluation methods and examples that focus on social capital on a quantitative or qualitative scale?
Social capital in particular?
And specific evaluation methods. So as you're going along, to evaluate how you're doing.
I think this is something that's still emerging. We have some tips on like evaluating and implementing actions, but it's one of those things, again, it doesn't have a straightforward answer necessarily, because it is a little bit more qualitative. So I believe we have some guidance on how to evaluate and how to look at the different actions that are proposed. But I think the consensus comes from the community. So it's not just this external, we're looking at it and we're evaluating it and we're seeing it as successful or not, or change or not, but the community has to say, yes, this is working for us. No, this is not working for us too. So it's kind of a little bit ambiguous as far as the answer, but we do have some guidance for it.
Great.
Yeah, and I would point to I think also thinking about specific evaluation methods, social capital, that reflection diary that we discussed at the end of the demo, that is really our contribution, I think, to this like evaluation of the process as it's going along, so folks can be reflective and change and pivot their process as they move along if things are not serving them well or are not working in their community. And so I think it's maybe a different approach than than the questioner is asking here of these specific evaluation methods, but we're sort of building in that that step to think through the process and how you might change the process as you move along. And so I think that's a space where you can they're not very formalized evaluation methods if you were, a process evaluator, but I do think that that's very helpful in that space.
Great, thank you. Early on in your presentation, you mentioned that the tool is a planning tool for building equity into resilience planning, but that it could also be applied to other types of planning. And a lot of our webinar viewers are local planners with local planning agencies or local governments. In the case studies that you've looked at so far, are the processes that you're working through with folks being initiated by planning agencies, community development organizations, or some combination of the two? Like where is the initial touch point, generally speaking, from the community to the EPA as you're working through the case studies and providing technical assistance?
Mostly, I've interacted with a lot of agencies, as you're saying. So thinking coming from the government. So that's why we really are like, oh, the core team is mostly state and local folks that are working for state and local agencies that are attempting to put together a plan. So, for example, most of my experience, and Raven has different experience, so we can both share. So thinking about hazard mitigation plans in particular, different kinds of mandated planning activities. These are ones that we have mostly, folks have come to us and said, we're trying to do this plan. Please help. We want to be more inclusive. And so that's really, those are the ones that I have been a part of. And so I think that really leads to that conceptualization of the tool as being used by those actors, by planners, because of these various plan types that have come up.
Yeah.
I don't know, Raven, if you have different,
just
you're more involved with the coaching, so.
yeah. So for the case studies, I know we worked with FEMA on multiples, and then we worked with a nonprofit, and we worked with a climate consulting firm as well. So it was very interdisciplinary in the sense of diverse in the types of organizations that were involved to engage the community. And I think EPA is really working on building strong relationships with communities. So part of how we're trying to have ERB enter into these projects is by building those relationships at conferences and webinars. But I think that there's the ERB is customizable in that too. Like a state or local agency could say, we want to work on our equitable resilience and do it in this specific type of community engagement. So we're going to use parts of the tool. But I also think a student working on a either like a thesis or a capstone that wanted to do community engagement could adapt the tool and use it for that. I even think a very, very motivated parent could use it for PTA meetings if they're like, we want to talk about health and air quality for our kids and safe transit to school. They could also look at the tool and get people that are interested and involved and just take off from there. And it doesn't necessarily need to have any state or higher agency. It could be, the community itself could totally take and run with the tool. So I just think that that's one of the ways that it's also customizable.
Great, thank you. Someone has asked a question that comes up in a lot of our webinars. How do you start the conversation about resilience with elected officials and get their buy-in, given the importance of the issue? And how do you have any advice for helping that convince them to become champions for the process?
Ooh, this is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I will say my recommendation is actually that, well, again, this like make the case kind of argument is again something that we hear a lot. And so if you jumping into the tool and thinking about those resilience assessments, like looking through those hazards, being able to talk to people and gather this information, like these are the hazards that people are experiencing, these are the assets that we have in our community, being able to show that is there. Folks have been very excited about making the case that way. So that would be my initial recommendation is, again, it's making that case, and we provide some activities for moving forward with that. But I think you probably also have a lot of that information already. And so being able to go out into the community and to tell your elected officials that, hey, folks do care about this. See, they are telling us about these things that we have this data on already. So I think that can be a strong starting point.
The only other thing I'll add is just looking for the naturally occurring synergies. So if the community is saying we have this concern, does it go with something else that that official is responsible for already trying to champion? Say it's like better maintained roads, and there's also issues of flooding. You could say, hey, we really want to talk about resilience and adapting
Mhm.
to increased rainfall, and you're talking about keeping the roads like in better shape and better maintained. We need to have these are a cross intersection, and we need to team up and collaborate to better achieve those goals. And I think that there's ways you can frame it to make them already want to do it because it's already aligned with things that they're already pursuing.
Right.
It's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Because all of the work around the tool involves equity and inclusion, there are a couple questions that sort of address that. Have you made human-centered design activities or processes that are adaptable to the neurodiverse community and people with different abilities, as well as folks who do not speak English as their primary language? So how do we incorporate getting all of those different voices involved in the process? And is there resources or advice available in the tool?
That's a very good point. Exactly. That's exactly what we're pointing to, is thinking about all of these different groups of folks and really working to involve them. Human-centered design as a practice is kind of is sort of a particular method that is used in research at the federal level. And so I'm not exactly sure how that in particular is bringing in those voices, but this is exactly the kind of communities that we're thinking about. How do you reach people in their language, reach them where they're at, thinking about neurodivergence? So that is definitely, again, baked into all of the tool pieces. A lot of this, though, is also knowing your community and, again, reaching out to the trusted leaders of those communities. So the other thing about this is not being the expert. So the core team is not, for example, the expert in all of the communities. That's not the goal moving forward. It's again, if you think back to that diagramming network connections, it's reaching out and knowing what communities exist and working with them to ask them how they would like to be involved, and how they can be supported. So the tool doesn't come in and say, okay, if you want to reach, autistic people, do this. It's more of a guidance through identifying those communities, finding out, meeting them where they are, trying to find those different locations where folks are, trusted leaders in that space, folks that are working with different groups, so that you can work with them. They're the experts in their own experience. That's what we say as social scientists. Everyone is, an expert in their own experience. And so to being able to work with these different groups as their own experts, and then bringing that expertise in. I hope that answers the question.
I think it definitely touches on the question. Raven, did you have anything to add?
Just that we don't have any language explicitly around neurodivergence, but in the facilitator's guide, we do talk about if you're engaging with different communities making that don't speak English, and how do you, so that's part of the brainstorming barriers in the facilitator's guide of, okay, if we're trying to reach certain demographics, is this going to be context appropriate for them to engage in a way that makes sense for them? And we do talk about translators as well. So just like, even though it's not extremely specific, we prompt thinking through it when you're thinking through your engagement strategies.
Right, because it might be different for every community.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You can't just list out, okay, unfortunately, right? We can't just say like step 1, do this. Okay, now it's done.
Right.
It's a bit more. You really have to get in there and see who you're talking to. Context specific.
Mm-hmm.
One question is asking, They saw some qualitative data collection techniques in your presentation. Does the tool provide guidance for qualitative and quantitative data collection, analysis, and integration to inform decision making, which can sometimes be a challenge?
I'll start and then hand it to Marissa. There's some guidance, but there is by no means any kind of comprehensive um, course on how to analyze qualitative and quantitative data. But in the gathering data, the assessing resilience section, we point you to the different statistical sources and the types of more traditional and standardized quantitative data sets. But I think that we guide people and hold people's hands through qualitative engagement without using all of the jargon around it, and we make it more human focused. Storytelling is essentially interviews and focus groups. So even though we're not using that language, I think we do step by step guide people on how to best gather that information. And then in the strategizing, when you really in other parts of the tool, there's activities of weighing what do people say and now what are our next steps. That's going to give you some concrete steps to think through on when you're choosing and prioritizing actions. And again, it's coming from the community. So you would have a brainstorming actions workshop and people say, oh, these are the things we want to see happen and these are our ideas. And then you would have to work through what are the pros and cons. So there's this, it's all very iterative and cyclical as well. So that's part of what's nice if you can be in one part of the tool and then circle back to another, and it's informing both future engagement and think how you would evaluate past engagement.
Definitely. Yeah. And I would also just say that, yeah, just to add on to that, that's exactly right. We also are pointing folks, again, not wanting to, recreate the wheel. We're pointing folks to these really great resources that already exist that are crunching a lot of that data. So we're saying, hey, you can find this over at CDC and bring that information in. You can find this over in some of our other quantitative tools at EPA. You can think about EnviroAtlas, EJ Screen. There's a wealth of data out there, but I do think what we do walk people through, as Raven just said, in a non-jargony way, is that qualitative. I think the qualitative is the thing that folks often need the most support in bringing that information in a useful way. Not that folks don't know how to listen or bring people to the table, but I think it's that part of like, okay, now what with that information? And that's what a lot of the activities walk people through is really using that qualitative data.
Right. Okay. We have two questions specific to the coaching and your open office hours. Can any community qualify to receive coaching? Are there criteria that a community needs to meet? And if you could repeat the information about the open office hours in terms of when, both days and times.
Yeah, let me just pull it up so I triple check myself. But there is no pre requirement for communities to participate in the coaching. My mentor and I would do an intake call just to make sure ERB is best suited to support the goals and kind of come up with a mutual agreement on what are the objectives. And so to just make sure it's a good fit, and then other than that, it's just more of a discussion to make sure like, oh, is this tool the right fit for you? Does this fit your needs and timeline? How can we or other people that are coaches best support you in the work that you do? Are we the best to do that? That would be the only thing, if the timeline or availability of people, or if the context wasn't appropriate to use ERB, which I can't really imagine that, but those are the only things I would say would be kinds of disqualifiers. And so the ERB office hours are the second Wednesday and third Friday of every month. So this week it's on Wednesday from 3 to 4 p.m. and on Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. And these are both in Eastern times. We tried to pick times that are flexible depending on if you're West Coast or East Coast. So basically, hopefully you can come to one or the other. And so those are opportunities to just swing in as you would like, and you can come in towards the end. We stay online for the whole hour, even if we don't have a queue, and we would just take people's questions in order that they appear if there is several people that hop on at the same time. And you can see those updated hours for each month on the same webpage where our website lives.
Great. Thank
And
you.
that's tomorrow, by the way, Wednesday meaning
Tomorrow,
tomorrow.
Wednesday, tomorrow.
So you can
Conveniently, put
immediately
that on your
Yeah,
calendar.
and this Friday.
and this Friday.
Awesome. We're getting close to time, so I wanted to give you both a chance to give some final remarks, anything that you wanted to talk about that you weren't given an opportunity to talk about, or any of the questions you saw in the question and answer box that I didn't get to that you would like to address.
Just quick, well, one, thank you, everyone. These questions are so great. This is sometimes we get some crickets when we're sharing, so this has been a really great conversation, and we have things that we'll take back to our team as we continue to work on the tool and improve it. Just a quick recap, the tool is free. You download it and it lives on your device. It is not accessible by EPA servers at all. The coaching is free. Our emails have been shared. And if you are experiencing any glitches with the Mac or anything of it, or just have any general questions, we welcome that feedback, and we really are trying to make sure it best serves those that are trying to use it. So please email us and reach out.
Yeah, all I can say is ditto. That was very nicely said, Raven. We're really excited for feedback, and we are very much hoping to make this tool as useful to you as possible. And so, yeah, we'd love to hear pushback. We'd love to hear feedback, and we hope we can engage you in some of our office hours or coaching sessions. And I'm really excited. I didn't have a chance to go through all the Q&A while we were responding here, Jill, but I'm very excited to look through that, and hopefully we can respond to people's specific questions as well in coming days.
Great.
One more thing is, although there's not a direct revenue stream to support ERB activities, we can point you to grants, and we're trying to naturally find those synergies. But I think ERB supports both for helping to apply for grants. If you have that robust community input, can really, again, help you make the case, but then also using grant to implement the actions that you identify with it. So again, very iterative before and after with finding funding and the implementation.
Mm-hmm. And there is a funding guide as part of the tool as well, to kind of start that process, start that conversation and thinking about it. So you can check that out as well. I think that's in the move forward section, Raven, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Maybe.
Great. Well, to conclude today's webinar, Viewing Resilience Planning Through an Equity Lens, I would like to offer my sincerest gratitude to Raven and Marissa for joining us today and for sharing the Equitable Resilience Builder tools and their important work on these important issues. Thank you to everyone who attended, and as always, thank you to John Coleman, who's behind the scenes, keeping our webinar running smoothly. A complete recording of today's webinar will be posted online. As we mentioned earlier, August is Climate Month for the Smart Growth Network webinar series. So please look at our website for upcoming webinars, including next Thursday's webinar, another EPA partnership where we will be discussing data-driven approaches to extreme heat. When you exit today's webinar, you will be asked to participate in a short evaluation. Please take a moment to provide feedback so that we can continue to improve the webinar experience. Only those who requested a certificate during registration will receive one via email following the webinar. Please keep an eye on your inbox for details on future webinars sponsored by the Maryland Department of Planning and the Smart Growth Network. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day.